source of imposing the Jews on Palestine and its people must also withdraw. Their colonial damage is done. In my view, they are incapable of making a positive contribution to the situation. Mr. Blair should be returned to his American kennel and be muzzled. No, in fact, he should be taken and prosecuted for war crimes, along with Mr. Bush. The political UN, the Security Council, despite the good work of UNRWA and people like John Ging in Gaza, should be sent packing. As long as the Security Council remains corrupted by the 5 permanent members with veto powers, there is no added value of having the United Nations consider issues. And we've seen only so recently, in regard to the massacre of 31 May of our Turkish friends, the Security Council was unable to produce a resolution with any teeth. The General Assembly again let us down. They refused to consider a Malaysian resolution. And as it remains weak and divided, it also has failed us. And the Group of 77, the non-aligned countries, sadly remains divided. The UN, unfortunately, is a tragic embarrassment in peacemaking and in ending Israeli occupation, the violence of human rights denial, and the murders of Palestinian hopes and opportunities, in fact, the murder of lives. The UN has failed, as I've said, the Palestinian people. Well, that leaves us, to me, the neighborhood, to work for peace. I mean Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, including Kuwait, but especially I mean Turkey, Egypt, and Iran, supported by the Arab League, which needs to do, of course, much better. Egypt and Turkey are allies of the Americans, they're allies of each other, and they're allies with Israel. They have influence. They must use it to push Israel back to the lines of 1967 and to recognize the right of return, pay reparations to Palestinians who have been homeless and wandering the desert for many, many generations, and restore all human rights and equality, and finally terminate the racism of the Israeli apartheid wall. Iran can use its power and influence for non-violent intervention, for support of the Palestinians as per the philosophy of Perdana. And not just to restore Palestine, but to work with an Israel or a Jewish presence without Zionism. Together, the neighborhood can work on 1 or 2 country resolutions. One federal state may be the best solution. One can visualize the model of Switzerland, in which a country in which the states that make up the whole could reflect the complicated mix that is the people of Palestine. The country resolution, I think, is a matter, of course, for the Palestinians, for the Jews to work out for themselves. But clearly, the neighborhood needs to demonstrate that the civilization and sophistication of the Islamic world can yield peaceful resolution of conflict and can set in motion a change which we all desperately require. And the Arab League clearly must play a more active role in this situation. The rest of the world, including Malaysia, including Ireland and others, must invest heavily in the Palestinian community, in such areas as return, resettlement, the rebuilding of homes, in healthcare, in education, in jobs. All the basic human needs and rights that we all want for our families and for our children. Palestinian dreams in Gaza, the West Bank, or in the camps of Lebanon are no different from the dreams that we have for our children here in Malaysia or in Ireland. Now, you've heard some wonderful speakers, and I believe what we need to work towards today, to end, of course, the terror and the poverty and the misery that is Gaza, but to see if we can employ the goodwill of Malaysia and the neighborhood represented here to produce ideas, an approach, a plan to restore to the Palestinians their very lives, the free of Israeli occupation, Israeli aggression and siege. Let's consider shutting out the colonial past, including the EU, of course, and the United Nations, and exploiting media and our resources to find a path that leads forward to justice, to peaceful togetherness, and above all to human well-being for all the peoples of the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Before we open up to questions, I've been receiving quite a number of written questions here, and I've also been receiving some questions coming in from Twitter. In the meantime, if I may, I'd like to give an opportunity to all our speakers to, if you have any new additional points that you want to make before we open up to the questions. Professor Chossudovsky, do you have any additional points that you want to present before we open up? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe that what is important in our resolve in relation to the rights of Palestine is to understand the underlying issues in the broader context of the Middle East. We are at the crossroads of the most serious crisis in modern history. The United States, in alliance with NATO and Israel, have launched a military adventure which threatens the future of humanity. And this is not an understatement, where they wish to use their own nuclear weapons, which they describe as harmless to civilians, in a very twisted logic of turning realities upside down and presenting the atom bomb as a humanitarian bomb which will liberate people. And they are targeting Iran. And if they target Iran, that whole region, from the eastern Mediterranean right to the Chinese border, will erupt, putting us potentially in a World War III scenario. And what has happened with the operation directed against the flotilla, that this is an act of provocation. It is a criminal act, but it is also an act of provocation in the logic of what they call justified vengeance, which then leads to a scenario of escalation. And we see that escalation occurring. We see the United States mobilizing troops and military hardware in the Persian Gulf. We see Israeli submarines in the Persian Gulf. We see the deployment of the so-called missile shield in Eastern Europe, in the Caucasus. And we also see how all this is linked up to the hegemony of the oil companies, including British Petroleum, which was previously called the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. And we also see how Israel is a key player in this battle for oil. So I think we have to understand that we're not dealing with identifiable regional theaters of war. We're dealing with potentially with a World War III scenario which could erupt, because ultimately these people believe their own propaganda. They are so cynical in their approach that they don't understand that when they press the button they can unleash a war of tremendous scale with weapon systems which have never been used prior to in modern history on that scale. So that is what I want to state. Let us understand that this is not strictly a conflict between Israel and Palestine. This is a war against humanity, and it is a US-sponsored agenda. And the United States is behind Israel in these various endeavors. Israel has some degree of autonomy, but ultimately even its air defense system is controlled by the United States. So let's also shift the target. Obama is just as much a criminal as Netanyahu.